St. Petersburg was wrapped in ice and silence. The kind of silence that weighed heavy on the streets, broken only by the distant screech of tram brakes or the crunch of boots on fresh snow. It was nearly midnight. Most of the city had retreated indoors, into the warmth of flickering stoves and the lull of winter dreams. But Viktor Malenkov was not most people. The back seat of his bulletproof Bentley offered luxury and isolation, exactly what he liked. The leather was imported. The driver knew better than to speak. Victor stared out the tinted window, his sharp blue eyes drifting over icy sidewalks, golden domes blurred in fog, and forgotten alleyways shrouded in darkness. Then the car slowed. Not because of traffic, but because Victor raised his hand, a rare motion that made his driver glance nervously at the rearview mirror. "Stop here," he said flatly. They were in one of the older quarters of the city, far from where men in tailored coats made deals over caviar and vodka. Here buildings leaned with age, neon signs flickered, and there in a narrow corner between two abandoned kiosks, he saw her. She looked like a shadow at first, just a shape pressed against a wall, hunched beneath layers of mismatched clothing and worn-out boots. But then he saw the cardboard, propped behind her like a makeshift barrier against the wind, and the way her fingers trembled as she clutched them into fists, trying to stay awake. A girl, maybe 18, maybe 20. Her hair was matted, her lips blue, but her eyes, they were open, wide open, not glazed with desperation, not empty like so many others he'd ignored before. No, her eyes burned with something else. Defiance. She didn't look at him, not directly, but he knew she'd seen the car. She just chose not to react. Like the cold, she had grown used to being noticed and ignored. "Should I?" the driver began. "No," Victor cut him off. The light turned green. The car moved, but Victor remained still, frozen in place by what he had just seen. He had built empires, bought companies, signed deals that changed countries. But that look, that strange, stubborn fire in the eyes of a girl surrounded by cardboard and snow, somehow shook him more than any negotiation ever had. He didn't know her name, but he wasn't going to forget her. The next night, Victor returned. He told himself it was just a coincidence, that his route home happened to pass the same street, that he wasn't thinking about her. But the truth hung heavy in the back of his mind. He hadn't stopped thinking about her since he saw those eyes. She was still there. Same corner, same cardboard, same silence. Snow had gathered on her shoulders like she belonged to the city itself. This time he came prepared. Wrapped in the back seat beside him was a heavy winter coat, dark navy, lined with wool, simple but warm. On the seat next to it, a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. No gourmet nonsense, just bread, meat, and cheese. Honest food, the kind that meant survival. He motioned for the driver to stop, but didn't say a word. The engine hummed as Victor stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the slush. The cold slapped him in the face, unforgiving. Real. She looked up when she heard footsteps. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Her face was pale, nose red from the cold, but her eyes remained sharp, cautious, unreadable. "I don't want your money," she said before he even opened his mouth. Victor didn't answer. He simply placed the coat and the sandwich on the ground beside her, nodded once and turned to leave. "Why?" she called after him. He paused. Without looking back, he said, "You looked cold." That was it. He got into the car and drove away. The girl waited a long time before touching the sandwich. She didn't eat it immediately. First, she unwrapped it slowly, inspecting every edge like it might be a trap. Then she smelled it. Her stomach growled. She took one bite and then stopped. She wrapped the rest again, as if saving it for later, for tomorrow. The coat lay untouched beside her, not out of pride, but because she had learned, nothing given is ever truly free. Later that night, when the wind picked up and the snow began to fall harder, she finally reached for it. She pulled it over her thin shoulders and curled into it like a shelter. And for the first time in weeks, she slept. Her name was Anya. She was 19 years old, and she had forgotten what it felt like to be warm. Viktor Malenkov had always prided himself on control. Control over markets, over negotiations, over people. In the world of business, he was known as the Frost, not because he was cruel, but because nothing ever moved him. And yet, for the past 4 nights, he had been haunted by the image of a girl wrapped in cardboard. He didn't know why. It wasn't pity. He had seen poverty before, passed by dozens like her at stoplights, under bridges, on corners near his office. He had funded charities, written checks, hosted fundraisers where people wore tuxedos to feel generous. But this wasn't about guilt. It was something else. He sat in his penthouse suite, 32 floors above the city, with a glass of expensive Armenian brandy in hand. A fire crackled beside him, and still her face lingered behind his eyes. That look, that fierce, unspoken challenge in her gaze. She hadn't flinched, hadn't begged. She hadn't even said thank you. It wasn't arrogance. It was survival. She had stared into the face of a man who could buy a skyscraper with a phone call and stayed perfectly still. Why? Why hadn't she reacted like the others? He thought of her fingers, raw, shaking from the cold, but tightly curled into fists. The way she had unwrapped the sandwich so slowly. The way she had refused to touch the coat until the night deepened and she had no choice. That wasn't despair. That was defiance. A will to live that no amount of money could smother. Victor leaned back in his leather chair and whispered to the silence, "Who are you, girl?" He had once closed a 1 billion-ruble deal in 30 seconds. He had owned oil fields, banks, even a media company. But for the first time in years, he found himself faced with something he couldn't quantify. Anya. He didn't even know her last name, but her presence had cracked something inside him, something he didn't want to name, something dangerous. And that frightened him more than anything, because it wasn't pity he felt, it was curiosity. And Viktor Malenkov had never followed curiosity without consequences. It was the 5th night. Victor didn't wait for a reason this time. He had the car stop without instruction. The heater was on, his coat was thick, his world was warm. But that corner of the city still held her, still froze her, still dared him to do more than just watch. She was there, again, same spot, same cardboard shield, but now wearing the coat he had left, zipped all the way up. Her eyes lifted the moment the car stopped, as if she had known he would come back. She said nothing when he approached. He crouched this time, leveling himself to her. The snow fell between them like a curtain, soft, slow, soundless. "I have a place," he said, voice low. "It's warm, safe. No one will ask questions." She didn't blink. "You can stay if you want," he added, "or leave tomorrow, or tonight. That's up to you." Silence, then, "Why?" Her voice wasn't weak. It was tired but firm, like someone used to suspicion. "Because this isn't how people should sleep," Victor replied. "Even the strong." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't want to owe you anything." He nodded once. "Then you don't." Another pause. The snowfall thickened. Anya stared at him for a long time, like she was measuring something more than just his words, like she was weighing the shape of his soul. "Fine," she muttered finally, "but just for the night." Victor didn't smile. He simply stepped aside and opened the car door. The ride was silent. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't offer. But when she saw the apartment building, guarded, modern, tall, her fingers twitched slightly in her lap. The kind of place where the walls were so clean, they looked untouched by human struggle. Inside, she hesitated at the door. "It's just a guest room," he said, sensing her discomfort. "No locks, no rules." She nodded, stepped in, and quietly examined the space. Warm bed, private bathroom, a small table with a teapot. Too perfect. She turned to him. "I'll sleep here," she said, "but I'm not your responsibility, and I won't be part of your charity." "You're not," Victor answered. "You're just cold and tired." A long breath left her lips. She sat on the bed, hands on her knees, still guarded. He didn't linger. "There's food in the fridge," he added. "I'll leave you alone." And he did. He left the room, closed the door behind him, and stood in the hallway longer than he should have, unsure whether he had just offered kindness or opened a door to something he didn't yet understand. Inside the room, Anya sat still for several minutes. Then she exhaled. And finally, After weeks of curling against stone and snow, she stretched out on the bed and let the warmth hold her. Just for the night. The morning sun in St. Petersburg was never warm, only paler than the night, but it filtered gently through the guest room window, landing on the edge of the blanket that now covered Anya. She hadn't moved much. Her body still didn't fully trust the softness beneath her. She had survived too many nights on stone to believe in comfort. In the kitchen, Victor made tea. He didn't cook, never had, but he knew how to pour hot water, and this morning it felt like enough. He didn't knock. He simply placed the tray on the floor outside her door and walked away. By noon she emerged, hair tied back roughly, eyes heavy but alert. She sat across from him in the living room, where a quiet record played something classical and sad. He didn't ask questions, just nodded toward the tea. "You don't strike me as someone who rescues people," she said flatly, her voice still rough from the cold and caution. "I don't," Victor answered, sipping calmly. "I just offer shelter from the storm." Anya stared at him, unmoved. "You want to know why I don't trust this?" she asked, eyes locked on his. "Because it never comes free." "Not really." Victor didn't interrupt. She leaned back, her hands resting on her knees. "My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. She fought like hell, but it took everything. After that, stepfathers, group homes, government shelters, each one worse than the last. I ran, repeatedly, not because I hated the rules, but because I hated the trade." "The trade?" Victor asked softly. "You know the one," she said coldly. "A roof for silence, food for obedience, a bed if I turned my back and said nothing." The air stiffened between them. "I don't trust charity," she continued, "and I definitely don't trust kindness, because I've seen what comes attached." Victor set his cup down, looked at her, not with pity, but with a sort of calm resignation. "I'm not people anymore," he said quietly. "I've spent so long behind glass that I don't know what to offer except silence. I don't want anything from you. I don't even expect gratitude." Anya raised an eyebrow. "Then why let me in?" He looked out the window. "Because I saw something that reminded me what it's like to feel real again." She didn't respond immediately. Then, "So what? I'm a reminder." "Some poor little broken mirror you like looking into?" "No," Victor replied, "just someone who didn't look away." A long pause followed. Anya stood, walked to the window. Snow was beginning to fall again. Slow, quiet, cruel. "If I stay," she said finally, "it's on my terms." Victor didn't flinch. "As it should be." She didn't smile, but for the first time, her voice softened, if only by a shade. "Then maybe I'll stay a little longer." The following week, Anya began to rise early. She didn't say much. She never lingered over breakfast, and she cleaned her dishes in silence. But she didn't leave. That in itself said something. Victor noticed her gaze drifting when she passed his study, the shelves lined with books and file cabinets full of papers. She'd pause for a split second, just long enough to notice the organized mess. One morning he asked, without turning from his coffee, "Do you know how to file documents?" Anya raised an eyebrow. "Like alphabetically?" "Alphabetically, chronologically, digitally. Any way that keeps things from collapsing into chaos." She shrugged. "I worked in a school once, filing records, before things fell apart." He nodded once. "Come with me tomorrow." She hesitated. "To where?" "My office." Anya stared. "You want me to work for you?" "No," Victor replied. "I'm offering a job. There's a difference." The next day, she stepped into Malenkov Holdings for the first time. The building was a glass fortress in the center of the city, where suits moved like shadows and elevators hummed without a sound. Eyes followed her. They always did. A girl in plain jeans and an oversized coat didn't exactly blend in. But Victor walked ahead, unbothered. And when they reached the archives, he pointed to the dusty back room. "These," he said, gesturing to stacks of unsorted files, "have been ignored for months." "Because they're not important?" "Because no one cares enough to make sense of them. But they matter." She rolled up her sleeves. The work was simple, but honest. Papers needed sorting, numbers cross-checked, digital logs scanned in. She worked quietly, methodically, losing herself in the rhythm of order. A week later, Victor handed her a small envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside, her first paycheck. Her fingers trembled. She stared at the amount. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She quickly turned away, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Victor said nothing. Anya swallowed, closed the envelope, and simply nodded. She didn't say thank you, and Victor didn't expect her to. Trust wasn't a currency. It couldn't be handed out like wages. It had to be earned, in silence, in effort, in time. And in that moment, neither of them said it aloud. But something had shifted. The elevators at Malenkov Holdings were silent, fast, and strictly hierarchical. The topmost elevator, the one that went straight to the executive floor, was reserved for those who wore $1,000 watches and walked like they owned the sky. Anya never used it. Her workspace was in the archives, tucked away on floor 6, where no one noticed anything unless it caught fire. But that day, the service lift had broken. Maintenance waved her toward the main lobby with an apologetic shrug. Use the express, and they said, just this once. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. She leaned into the corner, head down, trying to shrink into the beige wallpaper. But then the doors opened again. Victor walked in, followed by two sharply dressed men from the board, Kravchenko and Demon. They spoke in clipped Russian about stock options, quarterly returns, and some upcoming summit in Vienna. Then they saw her. Anya didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could feel it, the weight of eyes that judged before they understood. New janitorial intern? Kravchenko said under his breath. Demon smirked. Or someone Victor's decided to save this week. Victor said nothing. His expression didn't change. He simply pressed the button for the top floor. The silence tightened. Then Anya moved, slightly, just enough to meet their gaze. Not with aggression, but with the same quiet defiance she'd worn in the snow. Demon turned to Victor, smirking again. Bit of a downgrade in dress code, sir. That's when Victor spoke. She's my guest, he said. No anger, no defense. Just a cold, deliberate statement that struck harder than a shout. The temperature in the elevator dropped. The atmosphere froze. Kravchenko shifted awkwardly. Demon looked down. The ride continued in silence. When they reached the executive floor, the doors opened with a soft chime. Victor stepped out first, then turned just briefly to look at Anya. Come by later, he said. I have something for you. She nodded once. The doors closed behind her. Downstairs, whispers would start. They always did. But for the first time, Anya didn't feel smaller, because someone powerful, had named her as something more than invisible. And that meant everything. Victor didn't ask questions, but he listened. In between their guarded silences and passing glances, Anya had let a few details slip. One night, over half-finished soup, she had mentioned music. Not the kind in elevators or restaurants, but the kind you feel in your ribs. The kind that makes a broken home sound like a memory instead of a wound. My mother used to play, she said almost by accident. There was this upright piano in our flat, secondhand, some keys stuck, but it sang like nothing else. She hadn't mentioned it again, but Victor remembered. One cold Friday evening, he asked her to meet him at one of his older properties, a building he rarely visited. It was quiet, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of dust and varnish. Anya raised an eyebrow. What is this place? Storage, Victor said simply, of things that once mattered. They walked down a corridor. At the end was a door slightly ajar. Soft lamplight spilled through. She pushed it open and froze. There in the middle of the room stood a piano, but not just any piano. Her piano. The nicks on the side, the chipped ivory on the high E key. The little rose sticker her mother had once placed above middle C, still there, though faded. She walked to it slowly, as if it might vanish. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. Then she pressed one, then another. The sound was clear, tuned, alive. I found it through a city warehouse, Victor said from behind her. The building was condemned. Your mother's name was still carved on the back panel. Anya's throat tightened. You fixed it? I had it restored, he corrected. Properly, as it deserved. She sat down, breath shaky. Her hands moved with hesitation at first, then instinct. A soft melody began to flow, fragile and unsteady, like someone remembering how to speak after years of silence. Victor watched from the doorway, unmoving. When she finally stopped playing, she didn't look at him. She just whispered, "You didn't give me a gift." He waited. "You gave me back my past." He said nothing. There was nothing to say, because some repairs aren't for things. They're for people. At Malenkov Holdings, whispers traveled faster than emails. And lately, they all followed the same thread. The girl. She had no title, no department badge, no polished heels or pressed blazer. And yet she had been seen in the executive elevator. Twice. She must be someone's niece. Number girlfriend, maybe. Did you see the piano shipment in storage? She was there. Alone. Why is Victor protecting her? In break rooms and conference calls, speculation brewed beneath polite tones. Interns raised eyebrows. Managers shared glances. Even the board began to murmur. Carefully, of course. No one confronted Victor directly. No one dared. But the tension was there, thick in the air like dust in an unused room. Anya noticed it, the way conversations paused when she entered, the looks that lingered too long, the clipped good mornings that didn't reach the eyes. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't used to being seen either. Not like this. One afternoon in the company's main corridor, two assistants walked past her, laughing a little too loudly. "Rags to riches," one said under her breath. "Classic billionaire savior story." Anya stiffened, but kept walking. That evening, she stood at the tall windows of Victor's study, watching the city blur beneath snowfall. She didn't say anything when he entered. "They're talking about me," she said finally. "I know," Victor replied. "You could make it stop." "I could," he said simply, "but I won't." She turned to him, puzzled. "You don't owe me anything, Victor. You don't have to defend me." "I'm not defending you," he said. "I'm letting them reveal who they really are." He poured tea as if discussing the weather. "But why keep me around?" she asked, her voice quieter. "It's not pity, and it's not charity. So what is it?" Victor looked at her for a long moment, and then softly, "You remind me of what's real." She didn't answer. Neither did he. But as he looked away toward the skyline, where power and wealth meant everything, he knew exactly why he couldn't let her go. Because in a world of mirrors and masks, she was the first reflection that didn't lie. Winter had turned the Neva River into a sheet of silver silence. The ice stretched wide and thick, strong enough to hold the weight of footsteps and secrets. It was Anya's idea to walk. Victor hesitated at first, not because of the cold, but because no one had ever invited him to something so simple without an agenda. No contracts, no obligations, just a walk. They left the car behind and stepped down onto the frozen bank. The wind bit through their coats, but neither of them complained. The city shimmered around them. Cathedrals in the distance, golden domes peeking through snowfall, chimneys painting white skies with quiet smoke. For a while they walked in silence. Anya kicked at a patch of snow. "Feels like another world down here." "It is," Victor said. "Most people only see it from bridges." She glanced sideways. "That what you do? Watch from above?" He didn't answer right away. "I used to," he finally said. "But lately, it's harder not to feel the cold." They paused at the river's center. Around them only the sound of wind and the crunch of ice beneath their boots. Anya wrapped her scarf tighter. "Can I ask you something?" Victor nodded. "Have you ever needed a family?" He didn't look at her. "I never had one," he said. The words fell like snow, quiet but heavy. "I was raised by nannies, tutors, and distant voices on intercoms," he continued. "My father was a businessman. My mother, a photograph on a hallway wall. I learned to speak to walls before I ever learned to trust people." Anya stared out across the frozen river. "I used to think needing people was weakness," he added. "That solitude made me invincible." "Does it?" "No," he said, almost laughing. "It just makes the silence louder." Anya's breath clouded the air. She didn't speak, but she stepped closer, not touching, just close enough for the wind to break differently between them. They kept walking. No destination, no purpose. Just two people who had spent too long alone, learning how to share the silence without needing to fill it. It began with a cough, just a quiet rasp in the back of her throat. Anya brushed it off, blamed the cold, the stress, the dust from the archives. But within days, her steps grew slower, her voice weaker. She tried to hide it, bundling herself tighter, arriving earlier, working through chills. But Victor saw the difference. He noticed the way she clutched her coat tighter in the hallways, how her hands trembled when she reached for a pen. And when she failed to show up one morning, without a call, without a note, he left everything. The penthouse, the meetings, even the board. He found her curled on the couch in the guest room, skin pale, lips dry, burning with fever. She tried to sit up, to insist she was fine, but her legs folded beneath her. He caught her before she fell. Within an hour, they were at the most discreet private clinic in the city. No one asked questions, not when Viktor Malenkov walked through their doors. Doctors rushed forward. Specialists were called. A private suite was prepared. Anya didn't protest. She couldn't. She drifted in and out of sleep, fever dreams painting her memories in strange colors. Victor stayed. He didn't leave her side. For 3 nights, he sat in the chair beside her bed, unmoving. A book rested in his lap, unread. His phone remained dark. His world, once filled with numbers, deadlines, and headlines, shrank to the sound of her breathing. One night, the fever spiked again. She mumbled in her sleep, tossing under the sheets. "Don't leave, Mama. Please." Victor's hand tightened around hers. He swallowed hard, jaw clenched. He turned his face away from the nurse who entered quietly, pretending to check the IV. But when she left, he let go just for a moment and pressed his forehead to the edge of the bed and whispered, "Her health is the only legacy I care about now. Not the skyscrapers, not the money, not the name that once commanded boardrooms. Only her." When the doctor finally said she'd recover, that the worst had passed, Victor didn't celebrate. He only let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He sat back in his chair and waited for her to wake up. Morning crept into the hospital room like a shy guest, soft, hesitant, unsure if it was welcome. Thin golden light spilled through the blinds, brushing gently against white sheets and machines that blinked steadily beside the bed. Anya stirred. At first, she wasn't sure where she was. The ceiling was too white, the air too clean, and everything was still. For the first time in days, there was no burning in her throat, no freezing in her bones, only warmth, only quiet. She turned her head slowly, and there he was, Viktor Malenkov. Slumped in the armchair beside her bed, his head tilted slightly forward, chin resting on his chest. He was still wearing yesterday's shirt, sleeves rolled up, his jacket folded over the back of the chair, and in one of his hands, her hand. Their fingers weren't locked, but resting, connected, gently, like a line drawn in trust. She blinked. Her memories came back in fragments. The dizzy spells, the drive, the clinic, the strange lights overhead, and through it all, him. She watched him sleep. In that moment, stripped of his tailored suits, his sharp posture, and his distance, Victor looked human. Not like the untouchable man on magazine covers or whispered rumors, but like a man who hadn't left her side even when she hadn't known he was there. Her eyes welled up, uninvited. Slowly, carefully, she turned her palm to fit into his. Not to pull away, but to hold back. Then with a voice barely stronger than a breath, she whispered, "Thank you." His eyes fluttered open, groggy, red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but alert the moment he saw her. "You're awake," he said quietly. She nodded. He sat up straighter, pulling his hand back as if unsure whether to hold on or let go. "You stayed," she said. "I wasn't going to leave," he replied. Anya looked away, blinking hard. "I didn't expect any of this." "Neither did I." They sat in silence for a moment longer. Two people who had nothing left to prove, just the gravity of what they had already shared. And in that pause, something subtle shifted. Not debt, not obligation, not charity, but care. Unspoken. Real. The clinic released Anya a week later. She returned to Victor's home quieter than before, not from fear or distance, but from reflection. Illness had carved something open in her, a vulnerability she couldn't ignore, and a warmth she no longer felt ashamed to accept. But peace never lingers long for those who've lived without it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past came knocking, unannounced, uninvited, and unwelcome. Anya had gone to a nearby cafe alone, bundled in a scarf Victor had given her, reading a borrowed book. She looked normal, almost invisible again, until a shadow fell across the table. She didn't look up right away, but she knew that voice. Well, well, look who's all fancy now. Her heart dropped. There he was, Dennis, her stepbrother, a decade older, greasy jacket, worn boots, smile too wide to be kind. What do you want? She said, already knowing the answer. He dropped into the chair across from her. Word travels, Anya. Some rich guy took you in, got you out of the gutters. That true? She didn't respond. I mean, must be nice, right? Warm beds, real meals. Maybe you forgot where you came from. I didn't forget, she said flatly. I escaped it. Dennis leaned in, his tone darkening. Don't get clever. You owe me. If it weren't for me, you'd have starved in that last shelter. You mean the one you stole from? His smile faded. Look, he said, shifting gears. I'm just in a tight spot. I need some help. A loan. You can ask your new friend. He won't miss a few thousand rubles. She stood. Leave, Dennis. You think you're better than me now? No, she said, pulling on her coat. I've always been better than the person you chose to be. He grabbed her wrist. That was when Victor arrived. He didn't speak, just stepped between them like a wall of ice. Dennis looked up, smirked, then scoffed. So this is the guy. I see what's happening now. Victor's jaw tensed. You have 5 seconds to walk away. Dennis snorted, released Anya's wrist, and stood. She'll come to her senses. They always do. But she didn't look back. Later that night, in the warmth of Victor's home, he asked gently, Why didn't you let me step in sooner? Anya sat by the window, calm but firm. Because I needed to send him away myself. Victor studied her in silence, and for the first time, he realized Anya wasn't someone he needed to protect. She was someone who had learned to protect herself. It was past midnight when Anya returned home. The city was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow, muffling the sounds of life. She entered the penthouse expecting silence, but found the soft clink of glass. Victor was in the living room, still in his suit, though the tie was undone and the top buttons loosened. A half-empty bottle of vodka sat on the table beside him, untouched food beside it. He didn't look up when she walked in. You're late, he murmured. I stayed to help the archive team close out a section, she replied, removing her coat. Didn't know I had a curfew. He let out a hollow chuckle. You don't. I just noticed. That last word hung strangely in the air. She turned to him and finally saw it. His eyes were glazed, not from the drink alone, but from something heavier, something that had weighed on him for too long. She sat across from him quietly. I used to drink to celebrate, he said. Now I drink to forget that I don't feel much worth celebrating. Anya didn't respond. I built all this, he gestured vaguely around the room, because I believed being untouchable was power, that no one could hurt me if I stood far enough away. He poured another glass but didn't drink it. I've made more money than most people could dream of, he continued. Bought silence, bought influence. But now, he looked up at her, and for the first time the man in the suit vanished. All that remained was a man with trembling edges. Now I'm scared. Anya frowned slightly. Of what? His voice dropped to a whisper. Of losing you. The room stilled. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers curled around the glass like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I don't know what this is between us. I don't even know what I'm allowed to feel. But every time you leave, even just for a few hours, I feel this panic. Like the ground might shift again and you'll vanish. And I won't be able to stop it. He laughed bitterly. I've never said that to anyone. Anya stared at him, not with shock, but with something gentler, like recognition. You're not afraid of losing me, she said. You're afraid of finally needing someone. He met her eyes and for once didn't look away. She stood, crossed the room, and took the untouched glass from his hand. No more vodka, she whispered. Just the truth. He nodded slowly, and in that fragile silence, something unspoken passed between them. The weight of loneliness, shared. The apartment was unusually quiet that morning. No soft clinking of teacups, no pages turning from the guest room, no distant notes from her humming in the hall. Just silence. Victor stepped out of his room, expecting to find Anya curled on the couch with a book or prepping tea in the kitchen. But the cushions were undisturbed, the kettle cold, her coat missing from the hanger. He felt the shift immediately. Something wasn't right. Then he saw it, on the dining table. A letter, folded neatly, no envelope, his name written in her careful, restrained handwriting. He sat down before opening it, bracing himself as if it might explode in his hands. Victor, you once told me you built your empire so no one could hurt you. I think I did the same thing, except mine was made of silence. But silence isn't peace, and comfort isn't freedom. I've healed in ways I didn't know were possible. You gave me time, warmth, and most of all, you never asked for anything in return. You reminded me I was allowed to be seen. That was more than kindness. It was rescue. But now I have to see who I am without the shadows. I need to walk on my own again. Not because I don't care about you, but because I do. If this is real, if what we built was more than safety, we'll find each other again. I promise. Anya Victor sat still for a long time. The letter trembled slightly in his hands, but he didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just stared ahead, the ache in his chest blooming quietly, like a bruise beneath the ribs. She hadn't taken anything from him. Not money, not even the clothes he'd offered. Just a bag, a scarf, and her own quiet resolve. The apartment felt colder. He walked to the guest room. Everything was in its place, perfectly folded, like she had never truly unpacked. As if, somewhere deep inside, she had always known this was temporary. But it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like pause, a chapter ending, but not the story. Victor sat on the edge of the bed she once claimed and read the letter again, and again, and again, until her words weren't just ink anymore. They were a promise. Victor never sent anyone to find her. Not his assistants, not the quiet security team that handled things before they became problems. Not even a private investigator, though the thought crossed his mind more than once. He didn't search, but he never stopped looking. Each morning he stood by the tall window of his penthouse. The city unfolded below, cars crawling through frost-bitten streets, strangers weaving through slush with collars pulled tight. And somewhere out there, he imagined her, Anya, not as the girl curled in the cold, not even as the quiet figure who once typed reports in his archives, but as something untethered now, moving, becoming. He would hold his coffee in silence and let his eyes drift to every girl in a gray coat, every sharp stride that reminded him of her, every bookshop door or narrow alleyway where her shadow might have passed. But he never moved beyond the glass. She had asked for space, for independence, for the right to choose her own direction. So he gave it to her. But that didn't mean he didn't ache. The apartment had changed. It was cleaner, quieter, almost sterile. He kept the guest room untouched, as if freezing it in time might somehow anchor her to it. The piano remained dust-free. He made sure of that. Sometimes, late at night, he would lift the lid and press one single key, not to play, just to remember the sound of her presence. His days continued, meetings, deals, headlines. But his mornings belonged to the window, and the street, and the hope. Not a desperate hope, not even a sad one, just the kind that lived quietly under the ribs, like a candle waiting in a snowstorm. He didn't chase her, because love, he had learned, wasn't always pursuit. Sometimes it was simply standing still and letting someone find their way back. It had been 6 months. Winter had surrendered to spring, and even St. Petersburg had begun to thaw. The snow retreated from the streets, the air softened, and the city resumed its steady, indifferent rhythm. But Victor's routine never changed. Every morning, the same window, the same silence, the same unspoken question lingering behind his eyes. Where are you now? And then, one afternoon, it came. A small envelope, cream-colored, slightly worn. No return address. Just his name, written in the same careful handwriting he had memorized without meaning to. Anya. He didn't open it immediately. He sat at his desk, turning it over in his hands. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until he broke the seal. Inside, a single page. No decoration, no signature at the top. Just her voice, etched in ink. Victor, I wasn't sure if I should write this. Maybe I shouldn't. But I thought you deserved to know. I'm okay. I found a small library near the coast. It's quiet. Old. It smells like paper and dust and peace. They hired me to help catalog the archive room. I rent a little flat above a bakery. The floors creak. The water heater hisses. But it's mine. I pay for it myself. Some mornings I wake before the sun, just to prove I can. I walk alone now, not because I have to, but because I choose to. And yet, every morning I still think of you. Not with regret, not with sadness, but with something I can't quite name. You didn't save me, Victor. You saw me. And that made all the difference. Anya. Victor didn't move for a long time. He read the letter twice, then again. The words weren't elaborate. They didn't say, I'm coming back. They didn't ask for anything. But they lived. They pulsed with life, with independence, with something he had feared would fade the day she walked away. She was out there, alive, working, building, and somehow still connected to him. He folded the letter slowly and placed it inside the drawer where her old scarf remained, untouched. That evening, he didn't stand at the window. He sat at the piano instead, and for the first time he played. Victor had told himself not to expect anything. The letter was enough, proof of life, of strength, of growth. He folded it into his days like a quiet ritual, neither feeding his hopes nor starving them, just living with it. But hope, once planted, grows in silence. It was a gray afternoon when it happened. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows, and Victor sat in his office, distracted by nothing in particular. A report lay open on his desk, unread. His tea had gone cold. He didn't hear the elevator, or the footsteps down the hall. Just the knock, 3 quiet taps. He looked up, slightly annoyed, expecting his assistant. But when the door opened, he forgot how to breathe. She stood there, in the doorway, wearing the same old coat, hair damp from the rain, a bag slung over one shoulder. No announcement, no warning, no ceremony, just Anya. He rose too quickly from his chair, knocking the pen off his desk. It hit the floor, but neither of them noticed. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. She had changed. There was something brighter in her face now, something lighter in the way she stood, like someone who had made peace with gravity. But her eyes, they were the same, steady, brave, familiar. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said gently. You are, Victor replied, voice cracking slightly. And I don't care. She smiled. Not the polite kind, the real kind. He stepped forward, hesitant, unsure if this was a dream that would break apart on contact. But she didn't move away. Why now? He finally asked. Because I miss the sound of your silence, she said. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. His hand trembled. I wasn't sure you'd come back. I wasn't sure either, she said. But I didn't come back because I was lost. I came back because I'm found. His eyes filled. He blinked quickly, but one tear slipped past and traced down the line of his cheek. She caught it with her thumb. Still don't like thank yous? She whispered. I'll make an exception, he whispered back. No kiss, no dramatic music, just a breath, a moment. 2 hearts that had wandered far and still found the same door. The press called it unprecedented. The board called it unstrategic. But Viktor Malenkov didn't ask for opinions. He walked into the quarterly meeting of his philanthropic foundation, a polished room lined with screens and suits, and made a single announcement that changed everything. "I'm shutting it down," he said. Murmurs rippled around the table. "Sir, the Malenkov Foundation funds 17 national programs. We just signed a 5-year plan with the ministry. You'll lose the naming rights." "I don't care," Victor interrupted calmly. They stared. It had taken decades to build the Malenkov Foundation into a brand synonymous with prestige. Scholarships, art endowments, think tanks, all designed to extend his influence beyond business. But none of it felt personal. None of it had a heartbeat. So he started over. 2 weeks later, the headlines shifted. The Anya Trust, billionaire refocuses legacy on street youth from corporate cold to human cause. Malenkov's new mission. Who is Anya, the woman behind the name that replaced a dynasty? He didn't do interviews. He didn't explain. But in the heart of the city, far from boardrooms and ballrooms, a new building opened its doors. It wasn't tall or flashy, no glass walls or statues out front, just a wide red door, a simple brass plaque, and a mural painted by local teens on the side. Hands reaching up, faces turned to the sun. Inside, warmth. Beds, books, music. Meals without questions. Counselors who listen. Showers without shame. It was called the Anya Trust. At the opening ceremony, Victor stood on a small stage with no microphone. Just a room full of young people. Eyes tired, shoulders tense. The kind of expressions he had once seen on a girl curled beneath cardboard in the snow. He looked out at them, then said, "I built a fortune trying not to feel anything. She showed me what I was missing. This place isn't about her story. It's about yours, and what you still have the right to write." In the back of the room, Anya stood quietly. No spotlight, no speech. Just watching. Her eyes glistened. Because this wasn't about being saved anymore. This was about saving others. Together. The sea murmured softly in the distance. Waves rolled in, not with violence, but rhythm, like breathing. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed wood. A faint breeze rustled the curtains of the seaside cafe, where 2 cups of tea sat between 2 people who had already been through every kind of silence. Victor and Anya. No suits, no security, no shadows. Just him in a linen shirt, sleeves rolled casually to the elbows. Just her with bare shoulders kissed by the sun, hair tied back in the wind's favorite braid. They sat on the porch of a small tea house tucked along the coast, a place neither of them had planned to visit, yet both somehow ended up needing. She sipped slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. "You don't check your phone anymore," she said gently. "I don't need to," he replied. "The only thing I waited for is here." Anya smiled, not in surprise but in understanding. They'd come a long way, from cardboard and concrete to warmth and waves, from unspoken pain to shared quiet, from separate past to a shared present. She turned to him, fingers curled around her cup. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, eyes soft. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you dedicate your life to me? The foundation, the time, the name, all of it. Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the sea for a moment longer, then placed his cup down carefully. "Because," he said quietly, "that day in the snow, I didn't save you." He looked at her now. "You saved me." Anya didn't speak. Her eyes shimmered. A slow breath passed through her lips. "I had everything," Victor continued. "Everything except something real. And then there you were. Not asking, not begging, just surviving. Proud. Whole. You didn't need rescue. But I did." She reached across the table and took his hand. Not as someone claiming something, but as someone recognizing it. "You were always my future," he added, voice breaking slightly. "I just didn't know it yet." The wind picked up, lifting the corner of the napkin between them. The tea had gone lukewarm. The world outside continued. But in that quiet coastal moment, time rested. There were no more questions left to ask, no debts, no distance. Only 2 people, sipping tea, who had once found each other in a snowstorm of silence, and stayed. St. Petersburg was wrapped in ice and silence, the kind of silence that weighed heavy on the streets, broken only by the distant screech of tram brakes or the crunch of boots on fresh snow. It was nearly midnight. Most of the city had retreated indoors, into the warmth of flickering stoves and the lull of winter dreams. But Viktor Malenkov was not most people. The back seat of his bulletproof Bentley offered luxury and isolation, exactly what he liked. The leather was imported. The driver knew better than to speak. Victor stared out the tinted window, his sharp blue eyes drifting over icy sidewalks, golden domes blurred in fog, and forgotten alleyways shrouded in darkness. Then the car slowed. Not because of traffic, but because Victor raised his hand, a rare motion that made his driver glance nervously at the rearview mirror. "Stop here," he said flatly. They were in one of the older quarters of the city, far from where men in tailored coats made deals over caviar and vodka. Here, buildings leaned with age. Neon signs flickered. And there, in a narrow corner between two abandoned kiosks, he saw her. She looked like a shadow at first, just a shape pressed against a wall, hunched beneath layers of mismatched clothing and worn-out boots. But then he saw the cardboard, propped behind her like a makeshift barrier against the wind, and the way her fingers trembled as she clutched them into fists, trying to stay awake. A girl, maybe 18, maybe 20. Her hair was matted, her lips blue, but her eyes, they were open, wide open, not glazed with desperation, not empty like so many others he'd ignored before. No, her eyes burned with something else. Defiance. She didn't look at him, not directly, but he knew she'd seen the car. She just chose not to react. Like the cold, she had grown used to being noticed and ignored. "Should I?" the driver began. "No," Victor cut him off. The light turned green. The car moved, but Victor remained still, frozen in place by what he had just seen. He had built empires, bought companies, signed deals that changed countries. But that look, that strange, stubborn fire in the eyes of a girl surrounded by cardboard and snow, somehow shook him more than any negotiation ever had. He didn't know her name, but he wasn't going to forget her. The next night, Victor returned. He told himself it was just a coincidence, that his route home happened to pass the same street, that he wasn't thinking about her. But the truth hung heavy in the back of his mind. He hadn't stopped thinking about her since he saw those eyes. She was still there. Same corner, same cardboard, same silence. Snow had gathered on her shoulders like she belonged to the city itself. This time he came prepared. Wrapped in the back seat beside him was a heavy winter coat, dark navy, lined with wool, simple but warm. On the seat next to it, a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. No gourmet nonsense, just bread, meat, and cheese. Honest food, the kind that meant survival. He motioned for the driver to stop, but didn't say a word. The engine hummed as Victor stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the slush. The cold slapped him in the face, unforgiving. Real. She looked up when she heard footsteps. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Her face was pale, nose red from the cold, but her eyes remained sharp, cautious, unreadable. "I don't want your money," she said before he even opened his mouth. Victor didn't answer. He simply placed the coat and the sandwich on the ground beside her, nodded once and turned to leave. "Why?" she called after him. He paused. Without looking back, he said, "You looked cold." That was it. He got into the car and drove away. The girl waited a long time before touching the sandwich. She didn't eat it immediately. First, she unwrapped it slowly, inspecting every edge like it might be a trap. Then she smelled it. Her stomach growled. She took one bite and then stopped. She wrapped the rest again, as if saving it for later, for tomorrow. The coat lay untouched beside her, not out of pride, but because she had learned, nothing given is ever truly free. Later that night, when the wind picked up and the snow began to fall harder, she finally reached for it. She pulled it over her thin shoulders and curled into it like a shelter. And for the first time in weeks, she slept. Her name was Anya. She was 19 years old, and she had forgotten what it felt like to be warm. Viktor Malenkov had always prided himself on control. Control over markets, over negotiations, over people. In the world of business, he was known as the Frost, not because he was cruel, but because nothing ever moved him. And yet, for the past 4 nights, he had been haunted by the image of a girl wrapped in cardboard,